Typically, when I post my podcast on YouTube, I have a video component to it along with the audio. Me rambling into the microphone, kind of behind the scenes shot. I don't on this episode, it's audio only. So I just want to give you a heads up. It's like listening to it on Spotify or Apple or wherever. So now, let's get into the episode and talk about FiLMiC Pro. If you follow the mobile video, mobile filmmaking, mobile video app world, you have most likely heard that FiLMiC Pro is going to a subscription model. That has caused quite the stir, I will say, in the industry, a lot of backlash. The number one thing that we learned this last week is the actual price for the subscription. We don't know the final pricing, but as of now, end of September 2022, this is the final pricing. So the question is, now that we know what that is, and I'll talk about that again in just a second, will you subscribe? Hey guys, Blake Calhoun, and another episode of Almost Professional, the podcast about mobile filmmaking, DIY filmmaking, indie filmmaking, really all things filmmaking. And today, FiLMiC Pro filmmaking, if that is such a thing, which I guess it's mobile filmmaking. But yeah, the subscription thing has really been interesting, to choose a nice word. And we now know the subscription price as published on their app. I don't think their official Twitter account posted it, but a few of the guys did, at least Christopher Cohen did. He's the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. Basically, he is the guy that really designs the app. And the price going forward is going to be $49.99 per year. So $50 a year subscription. While that is, I would say, affordable for some, absolutely not for everyone. It is at least more affordable than the initial pricing of $3 to $5 per week that they were initially testing. That almost seemed like a joke to me. I mean, it was like $150, $200, $250 a year. And then with the exchange rates in other countries, etc., man, that got expensive. I mean, even $50 is expensive. But in a weird way, I was thinking, because they did such high, crazy price, when they've come back now with this $50 a year, it almost sounds more affordable. I wonder if they did that on purpose, going from, hey, we're going to be $200 a year to, hey, we're going to be $50 a year. It almost sounds like you're saving money. It's kind of like when the government says, I'm making these numbers up, but hey, we've got a $2 billion budget here. We only spent $1.5 billion. So we saved $500 million. Of course, that money wasn't ever actually spent. So in a weird way, that is what this feels like to me. Again, I'm not saying that the pricing is too crazy now. I do think $50 a year is high, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the $200 a year was just absurd, and it was almost insulting for this type of app. And I think a lot of you guys out there probably agree with me. But for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to give a very quick backstory or a little brief history. I made a video about this on my iPhoneographer's YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. But about, 3 weeks ago or so, maybe a month now, I woke up to a bunch of comments on my YouTube channel and on Twitter asking me if FiLMiC Pro is going subscription. And I said, no. I've had the app since 2011, really a heavy user since 2012. So what's that, 10 plus years now? Always been a one-time app, a one-time pay app. And they do have in-app upgrades, in-app purchases, like the Cine Kit, the cinematographer's kit, which I'd always have recommended. And then additionally, the recent film look packs, which have been kind of cool. I don't use them, but I like what they're doing, especially for people that don't want to mess with color correction and post-production. Not really my cup of tea, but again, a nice thing to offer your customers, but also a way to generate income. Because I do get that once you download an app once, that you need to have some recurring income, especially if you're not getting tons of new users. I don't know the number of downloads they get. The rumor has been that they have between 5 and 10 million. That's a pretty wide number over the last 10 years. That seems high to me. It may be true, but I think I looked at charts recently and it was like 30 to 40,000 downloads in a month. So I guess it's absolutely possible they have that many downloads. How many of those are active users is another story. How often do you download an app because it sounds great, you're interested in it, it's like, $10, $15, and then you never really use it again. I've done that a lot. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. It is funny though, because over the years, people, they don't want to spend $1 or $2 on an app. And so when you're talking about a $15 app, they're like, what? Of course, they go eat lunch at McDonald's or whatever, and it's $10. And so in that respect, I've never understood the argument on apps being too expensive. They're not if they're one-time purchase. Subscription apps, another story. And in particular with what I would almost call niche apps. You know, video camera apps are really, in my opinion, especially the professional featured ones, are fairly niche. The average iPhone user probably just uses the native camera app, and that's fine for a lot of stuff. For what we do as filmmakers, it's not fine. And so I love that these apps are available. However, the prices have got to be right. And the main thing to know and understand is if you are currently a V6 user, and that's the current version of the app, nothing really changes for you. You get to keep the same app. You don't have to pay a subscription, but then you don't get the new features or the new upgrade that's going to come into V7. And this is where a lot of the issues, I think, have arisen. Because a couple things. Number one, they rolled out the test pricing to everybody, even people that already own the app, which was just dumb, okay? Let's just be blunt about it. Because people like me, I looked at it as like, what? I've already paid for this app. Now you're telling me it's a subscription app? That doesn't work at all. And a lot of people felt betrayed. Number two, they are rolling out this new pricing without us knowing what the hell we're going to get. I mean, V7 is not even launched yet. And so you're saying, hey, this is going to be, again, at the time, a few weeks ago, we thought $3 to $5 a week for what? For the current app we've already had for 10 years. Now, they've made some nice upgrades along the way, don't get me wrong. But that just seemed outlandish, truth be told. And it was. And evidently it was a mistake. They accidentally rolled out the pricing. Oh, and I should throw out one thing too, and I mentioned this in the video if you haven't seen it, the video about FiLMiC Pro changing, or dying is the way I put it. A little hyperbole there, but to some, of course, it is dead, but not to me. And again, I'll get into that more in a little bit. But they got acquired by Bending Spoons. And so a lot of this, maybe all of this from a financial perspective, is coming from them. And so I'm not saying that to blame Bending Spoons because number one, they're now FiLMiC Pro. They're one and the same, I think, at least the way I don't know about the company organization, but the way they're perceived to the outside world because the pricing is what the app is, and that's Bending Spoons and FiLMiC Pro. And the communication with everybody from that was really, really bad. I had to do some digging to even find out that Bending Spoons acquired them, which I'm not saying FiLMiC Pro owed me or really anyone an explanation, but when you start jacking your prices up, especially to just stupid, crazy rates, it's a good idea to let people know what's going on, and they didn't. And they know they made a mistake, so I'm not criticizing them now. I'm just kind of giving the backstory of what happened and where we are today. But ultimately, I think the lack of communication and then the surprise without seeing what we're getting has been driving a lot of the frustration. And I get it, I really do. And so one obvious question that popped into my head was, why did they do this? Why did FiLMiC Pro sell the company? And I don't know the answer to that, truth be told. Although I've got some best guesses, and then I have talked to a couple of the guys internally, kind of off the record. They're not really able to speak publicly at this point, which kind of understand and kind of don't, but I got a little bit of information. But my first inclination was they must be struggling. The pandemic, of course, hurt a lot of people. I don't know that it hurt internet type companies as much because we were all on the internet for 2 years, but it probably did. People didn't have, jobs. They weren't buying apps. And so that obviously hurt a lot of companies, and maybe FiLMiC Pro was one of them. I'm not saying they were strapped going out of business kind of thing, but I do know during the pandemic, they moved out of their office or they were sharing an office with Lumafusion. And so there's got to be financial aspects to this. And then the number two reason that in my mind, I guessed about was that maybe they needed funding or capital to expand their app. Almost like they were spinning their wheels is what I'm coming in my mind, not necessarily what they're doing, but they were kind of doing the same thing over and over again, which is what apps are. I mean, an app is an app. It's a filmmaking app. It's a video app. You can add new features, but you can only do so much. At least that's the way I see it. Now, granted, recently they've done some incredible updates. They did Log V3 Plus, which brings log to ProRes, which is the only app out there that does that to my knowledge. And the other thing is they've got the Frame.io integration, which is so cool. I did a podcast where that's probably a little bit ahead of its time. I've used it quite a bit on indie filmmaking, and I like it in particular as it relates to ProRes because you can shoot in ProRes, but then edit quickly off proxy files that are uploaded to the cloud. But the point is, that is a really cool feature they implemented, and that took a lot of time and money to make that happen. I have no idea about how that worked as a partnership with Adobe, because Adobe owns Frame.io now. But the point is, they probably needed some additional capital to expand and grow their app. And then the last thing is they probably wanted some consistent revenue, because again, it's been a one-time app for a long time, and pretty much all apps were until, just a few years ago. And that's what I want to get into next is why the change in all software across the board. I don't really totally grasp it because for years, if you've been doing this a long time, I've been doing this since the 1990s. Once I got out of college, meaning filmmaking, graphic design, etc., using software. And initially for me, it was Avid. Then it was also Adobe, Photoshop, After Effects. And then later it was Final Cut Pro. And then along came Premiere Pro. After Final Cut Pro, screwed everything up with Final Cut Pro 10 or X or whatever it was called. Forever, we bought software. We owned the software. We didn't rent it. And I guess Adobe was one of the very first ones to do that. I mean, in the past, you would buy Photoshop and then you would, whatever it was expensive. It was $500 or $600. And a lot of people wouldn't buy it. A lot of people pirated it, truth be told. And maybe that's part of the reason that they do this now, to limit pirating. I think I may have had a pirated copy of After Effects at one point because After Effects back in the day was like $1,500. And so that's why I think subscriptions for Adobe in particular work. I pay $56 a month, but I get After Effects, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, Illustrator. You get the whole suite of tools. And in the past, to get the whole buyout, it was like $3,000 or something. And then you had to pay the upgrade prices, which were, 10 or 20 or 30% of that. But what would often happen is you didn't upgrade. And so you would use the same, I think I used Photoshop 5 for like 10 years. I mean, I never upgraded. And so I look at it, for Adobe at least, that you get the most latest, greatest software. It's affordable, especially if you're making money, and that's key. If I'm making money on my subscription, I don't mind paying for it. And I work as an editor, not only on my YouTube channel, but I do commercials and corporate video and indie film and music videos, etc. And the average editor can charge $100, $200 an hour. The studio can. If you're doing freelance work, you might charge $50 to $100 an hour, depending on the job. That $50 to $60 a month you pay for in a half hour of work. And so if you're working as a filmmaker, it's no big deal. I get that it's irritating, but it's no big deal. But with FiLMiC Pro, I think it's different. There's very few people, at least in my opinion, and again, anecdotally in my circle on Twitter and YouTube, that make money with FiLMiC Pro. The Mojo crowd, mobile journalism, are probably the ones that do the most, and they're getting paid to use their phone, whether that's to record video or audio. And I'm friends with a lot of guys at the BBC or that are independent journalists. It seems like it's mainly overseas. It doesn't seem to be the case as much in the US at this point anyway. And then there are YouTubers like myself. I'm not a full YouTuber, but I use YouTube. I have my YouTube channel, but I make courses about these apps. And then I do tutorials on my YouTube channel about the app. Meaning when I say I'm not a YouTuber, I don't necessarily use FiLMiC Pro to produce my videos. When I'm shooting, I use a variety of cameras. I always say I'm not an either or guy. I know some mobile people are mobile strictly, but I use my iPhone a lot for B-roll. And I do use it routinely as an A camera, depending on the shoot, depending on the job. But I wouldn't say I use it to make money on YouTube, if that makes sense. Except again that I do tutorials and then I have training using FiLMiC Pro. That is where I do make money on the app. But again, as I said a little while ago, I think FiLMiC Pro and any video camera app is more niche. For example, I mentioned Adobe and editing and making money. So Lumafusion, that's a one-time app still at this point. Let's hope they stay that way. It's an editing app. It works with any footage, including ProRes now. So that means you can shoot on your Sony, you can shoot on a Blackmagic camera if you shoot in ProRes, or if you transcode, you can shoot on a Red camera, and you can edit now in ProRes or H.264, H.265 on Lumafusion. That means you can make money as an editor using Lumafusion very broadly and very generally. Mobile video, like with FiLMiC Pro, is much more niche or much more sporadic, I would say, in the professional side. For students, for mobile journalism, for indie film or YouTube, it's more prevalent. But again, how many of them are actually making money with it is something I don't know. But one fear I have related to FiLMiC Pro going subscription, I just mentioned Lumafusion, is that maybe it's going to talk these other companies into going subscription. So then like everybody's subscription, which is, obviously what's happened to us in the streaming world, unrelated to filmmaking. I call it the Netflixation of the world. Everything is subscription. I even know people that have like a BMW and they now have a subscription to get certain functions on their car. That is, pardon my French, bullshit, okay? That is not cool. And that I do think is greed. I've heard a lot of people say this is greed on FiLMiC Pro's part. I don't think it's greed. I really don't. I know these guys. These guys are good guys. They are actually, a lot of them are filmmakers at heart. Neil, the founder, they're all staying on the company as far as I understand. So they didn't just sell the company to venture capitalist type deal, although Bending Spoons may be VC. I don't really know much about Bending Spoons at all. The point is, this wasn't a cash grab. That's not my perspective. And so I don't think it's about greed. I think it is about profit. I mean, they're a company and, we live in a capitalist society and that's all good. However, I think it's more about sustainability and then growth, doing research and development and actually growing the app. Now, whether or not it'll be a niche app because it's a subscription now compared to the industry standard, which I think it is now, meaning it's broadly used across all mobile video industries, I think that will be the case. It can become more niche. But ultimately, it just comes down to whether you as an individual think a subscription is worth it. And the last point I'm going to make about Bending Spoons is they actually have acquired other apps that are now subscription. For example, Splice was an editor that was pretty popular. I think it's more for social media. You're not going to edit a movie in Splice. And then they acquired the Focus Live app. Same with that. That to me has always been more consumerish, not professional. Although it has pro features. The one thing that's interesting about Focus Live is it was one of the very first camera apps to do depth of field, where you can do like cinematic mode. What I'm wondering is if they'll take those two synergies, Focus Live and FiLMiC Pro, combine them and maybe make one app out of them, or maybe bring features from Focus into FiLMiC Pro to where FiLMiC Pro will have a depth of field look, because right now the only camera that has it that's third party, I believe, is ProTake, and it's not great. It's good, it's not great. The native Apple app is much, much better. I just wonder if Bending Spoons has overvalued FiLMiC Pro in their mind. And as a matter of fact, I ran a poll on Twitter, unscientific of course, although I had maybe over 200, almost 200 votes or so. I asked the question, now that we know the subscription is $50 a year, will you subscribe? And under 10% said yes. I think it was 9%. And that's about the same I've seen on my YouTube comments, although on YouTube it's probably even worse. I would say it's 95% no. And that's at no price. They are just against subscribing, period. It's more of a principle thing. They're against subscribing to apps. And I get that. I really do, especially mobile apps. I don't think I subscribe to any mobile apps. Actually, I do subscribe to ProTake. I did a video on my iPhoneographer's channel about ProTake and about some other alternatives to FiLMiC Pro. ProTake is $20 a year, which I think is much, much more manageable. But the point is, I don't really subscribe to any mobile apps at all. I do subscribe again to Adobe Creative Cloud, and I have some music subscriptions, but again, all those make me money, and that's the key point. And so the future for FiLMiC Pro may look a lot different than it does now. It may, I've said the word niche several times, and I really think that's where they're headed if they stick with this model. If they only get 10% of the current users to subscribe, then I did some quick math. It would take about 4 years to build back up to the current revenue of 1 year right now. So that's a really high turnover rate or churn of 90%. Again, these are just unscientific numbers, but it is kind of the feeling that I'm getting out there. So they obviously want more than 10% of current users to subscribe. But then if it does take 4 years to come back to the current revenue levels, if you maintain those numbers, then you go into pure profit after 4 years. And so if it's a long run thing, then that does make more sense. If it's purely about profit, which I don't think it is, I really don't. I mean, FiLMiC Pro has created a community around it. There's Facebook groups. There are obviously YouTube channels basically dedicated to it. Not just FiLMiC Pro, but mobile filmmaking. But FiLMiC Pro is a large part of that. They've been so good about sponsoring different events and film festivals, and when it comes to training and doing things for educational purposes. And so to me, they've got to create a free version of the app or a light version. And I'm not talking about V6. That V6 is there, and there's questions there too, because you go to V7 and try it for a year and you decide you don't like it. Can you go back to V6? Since they're not separate apps, which I, by the way, think they should be, it should be V6 and then now a new app, FiLMiC Pro Plus or FiLMiC Pro subscription. That way it's 2 separate apps. And I think also that would make people feel better about subscribing to something new instead of subscribing to something that you've already paid for. Another thing is, are the in-app purchases still going to be there? They should be. If you pay for the Syndicate, you shouldn't have to pay for that again. And truthfully, they should be included in the subscription price, especially at $50 a year. So there's a lot of unknowns, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But I really believe they need a free version or a light version of the app that offers the basic things, but then you subscribe to get all the bells and whistles, because otherwise they are going to lose out all the educational people. I mean, the Mojo guys go all over the world, in particular to some of the poorest places in the world, in Africa, etc. They're not subscribing to a $50 a year app. And then a guy, Rob Layton, down in Australia, he teaches mobile video, mobile filmmaking, and he recommends it to his students. He can't ask his students, and he tweeted about this, he can't ask his students to pay $50 a year. And then they don't have the budgets to pay for 20, 30, 50 kids, whatever in a class. Probably not 50, but 10, 20, 30 kids. You can't pay for their apps like that. So they got to either have student pricing or a free version that students can use, because in the end, it's that freemium model that is actually smart that a lot of companies use, because then those people will want to subscribe. They'll become customers, a paying customer. So it just makes sense to do that. And then it also makes sense because otherwise, again, hobbyists and people on YouTube, they're just learning, they're not going to download a $50 a year app. Look at DaVinci Resolve, perfect example. You can get DaVinci Resolve, pretty much everything about that, for free. If you want all the other bells and whistles, I think like noise reduction, and it used to be 4K, the free version could only do HD, but I think the free version's even 4K now. I have the paid version, but the paid version is only like $300, and that's the industry standard color grading software out there in the world. And so there are ways to do it that make sense, that not only benefit the company. Of course, I will say with Blackmagic, I've always said that's kind of a loss leader, because they want people to get into their ecosystem and then buy all their hardware and their cameras, etc. And so that's a good way to get them in. Kind of like with Apple, you get into the ecosystem and they trap you. You never want to leave. FiLMiC Pro doesn't really have an ecosystem per se, but I do think they need to consider offering, again, I know I'm repeating myself here, but I just really think they need to have either educational pricing or a free or a light version to get people into the world of FiLMiC Pro and then become subscribers potentially. Although at $50 a year, a lot of people are just never going to subscribe. One last thing along the future of FiLMiC Pro and I touched on it just a little bit earlier, I have heard that the key team of FiLMiC Pro are going to stay on for 2 years minimum. They've committed to 2 years. So that's important, because if it was like a cash grab thing, they would just bail. Here, they are committed to the app, and they're committed to the community, I think, to making a great app. Whether people will stick around for that, that's another story, yet to be known. But I am glad that the team is going to stay there. And I think that's one reason Bending Spoons was even interested in them, because of some of the computational imaging stuff they've done with their log profiles in FiLMiC Pro, not only V1, V2, V3, and V3+. Again, they're the only iOS app that I know of that has log in ProRes, which is pretty cool if you're an indie filmmaker especially. It's niche, but it's cool. And so you might be wondering, am I going to subscribe? Well, I kind of alluded to it throughout this podcast. The answer is yes, I'm going to subscribe, if for no other reason, just to see what V7's all about. I can afford $50, okay? I'm not super worried about that. But I mentioned this on Twitter. For what I do, it's more about what other people will do as it relates to how I use FiLMiC Pro and make money from FiLMiC Pro. Because as you well know, if you follow me, I do my YouTube channel, I do tutorials on FiLMiC Pro. So if I make tutorials about the new V7 FiLMiC Pro and only 10% subscribe, is that enough for me to warrant doing tutorials? That becomes niche upon niche. Mobile filmmaking video is already niche. So that becomes ultra niche. Same with the courses. My FiLMiC Pro course that I make is a very popular course. I've had it out for probably going on 3 years, 2.5 years. Courses take a long time to make, months of my life. I mean, my biggest course took me like 6 months to make, the smartphone filmmaking course. Kind of like making a movie, if you've ever made a movie. It's a big commitment. And so if they're not going to turn around and make the money back, then it's hard to warrant doing them. And so if FiLMiC Pro, well, not if they are, if they're going to be this high-end app that charges $50 a year, will there be a market for newbies to take the course? I don't know. I really don't know at this point. To me, it is hands down the best camera app. I know it's subjective, but I've used them all. And whenever I use another app, I almost instantly miss using FiLMiC Pro. Now, granted, it's because I am used to FiLMiC Pro and I truly like the app, and I found it just on a whim. The reason I first started using it back in 2011, 2012 was it was the only app at the time that would allow you to do 24p. The native camera app wouldn't do 24p. And interestingly, it still doesn't in HD. It only does 1080/30. It does it in 4K. But FiLMiC Pro allows you to do 24p. And I just thought it was so cool. And the rest is sort of history. I've been using it now for 10 years. And so this is going to change a lot of the way I make money as well on the business side of things for both my YouTube channel and my courses, potentially. Who knows? Maybe this will all work out. And I hope it all does work out well in the end for everybody. I mean, for FiLMiC Pro and also for the customer base. But any subscription app, no matter what, is going to reduce the number of customers there are. That's just a fact. But whether or not that hurts the overall bottom line for FiLMiC Pro, and then for us out here that use FiLMiC Pro to turn around and make a living from that, helping others learn the app, I don't know if that's going to affect us or not. I think it will. That's my initial feeling for sure. So I am going to subscribe. But again, it's, do I feel okay recommending a $50 a year app, again, to a newbie who may never use the app past that 1 year? I don't know. Do I feel like it's okay when there's other apps out there that do a very similar thing? Not the exact same. And as I said, I think FiLMiC Pro is the best. I really do. But you got Beastcam, you got Movie Pro, you've got ProTake, as I mentioned. It is subscription, but it's $20 a year. That's much more doable, I think, for most people. I think right now, and again, I did a video about this, I would recommend Beastcam to people that don't want to go FiLMiC Pro. It feels the most like FiLMiC Pro to me, the most familiar. I love the guys at BeastGrip. They're dedicated to mobile filmmaking. Very cool guys, Vadim and his team. They are awesome. And they really believe in what mobile filmmaking can do, really democratization of filmmaking. And their app is only, I think it's typically $5, and they've had it on sale recently for $1.99. So that's probably the way I would go if you don't want to do FiLMiC Pro subscription model. And so again, it's tough to recommend FiLMiC Pro to people who not only can't afford it, but really doesn't make sense for them to spend that extra money if they're only going to use it occasionally. So I'll circle back to the very beginning of this podcast. The question remains, will you subscribe? That is the biggest question out there, not only from my perspective, just from a curiosity point of view, but also because, again, of what I do on YouTube and the courses I make, etc. That's a selfish reason, but it's a true reason. But that's neither here nor there. The big picture question is, will FiLMiC Pro survive at this price point, and will you subscribe? I think about 10% of you will, but I think a large percent of you guys will not. So I really do hope in the end that FiLMiC Pro comes out of this okay, but that we as customers feel like we're getting the right value and we're not getting ripped off ultimately. I don't think that, but a lot of people do. And so it's going to take some time. I'm very hopeful for the future. I look forward to seeing what V7 offers. I'm cautiously optimistic for a certain segment of you guys. As a broad general app, I think FiLMiC Pro is not happening anymore. And that is sad. That really is sad to me. It kind of feels like the end of an era, if you know what I mean. I don't want to put too much into it, but sort of like people are with their computers and their phones, they become part of who you are, at least the kind of work you do. And so in that respect, it is kind of sad because I've been using FiLMiC Pro for 10 plus years. I've gotten to know the guys. And again, they're not going anywhere at this point, and I'm not going anywhere. But things are changing. And a lot of people won't be involved with that app anymore. That's just a fact. And so we'll see how it all shakes out. Well, thanks for listening, guys. This has been another episode of Almost Professional. I'm your host, Blake Calhoun, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode.